Laura Bennett sat quietly at a small table tucked into the corner of Bella Vita, an upscale Italian restaurant in downtown Chicago. It was a Thursday evening, and the place buzzed with activity. Couples laughed over candlelit dinners, groups of friends shared plates of steaming pasta, and servers moved gracefully between tables, balancing trays laden with food and drinks. The air smelled of garlic bread, roasted tomatoes, and freshly ground pepper. Soft jazz played faintly in the background, adding to the cozy yet sophisticated ambiance. For Laura, this was supposed to be a rare night off. She worked long hours as a freelance graphic designer, often spending entire days hunched over her laptop in her tiny apartment. Tonight, she had decided to treat herself, to step away from deadlines and client emails and enjoy a meal without distractions. She wore a simple blouse and jeans, nothing too fancy, but enough to blend in with the restaurant's clientele. Her dark hair was pulled back into a loose ponytail, and her face showed hints of exhaustion, though she tried to relax. The waiter brought her dish, a plate of creamy fettuccine Alfredo sprinkled with parsley, and placed it gently on the table. "Can I get you anything else?" he asked politely. Laura shook her head and gave him a small smile. "No, thank you," she replied softly. He nodded and walked away, leaving her alone again. As she picked up her fork and twirled the pasta, Laura glanced around the room. The restaurant was packed, but no one seemed to pay her any attention. That suited her just fine. She liked being invisible sometimes, especially when she wanted to think or unwind. But tonight, something felt different. Maybe it was the way the shadows danced across the walls, or how the chatter of voices seemed louder than usual. Whatever it was, it made her uneasy. She hadn't been eating for more than 5 minutes when 2 men approached her table. They were tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in matching dark suits that looked expensive. Their polished shoes clicked against the hardwood floor as they stopped beside her. One of them, a man with short gray hair and sharp features, spoke first. His voice was calm, but firm. "Miss Bennett," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument, "we need you to come with us." Laura froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. She blinked at them, confused. "Excuse me?" she managed to say, lowering her utensil onto the plate. "I don't understand. Who are you?" The second man, younger with a square jaw and piercing blue eyes, crossed his arms over his chest. "This isn't up for discussion," he said curtly. "Please stand up and follow us." Laura's heart began to race. She shifted uncomfortably in her seat, gripping the edge of the table. "Look, I don't know what this is about," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "But I'm not going anywhere until you explain yourself." The older man sighed, clearly annoyed. "We don't have time for this," he muttered under his breath. Then, without warning, he reached out and grabbed her arm. His grip was firm, almost painful. Laura gasped, jerking back instinctively. "Let go of me," she exclaimed, her voice rising. Heads turned as other diners noticed the commotion. "Ma'am, please cooperate," the younger man said, stepping closer. Together, the 2 men pulled her to her feet. Laura struggled, twisting her arm in an attempt to break free. "Stop it. What do you want from me?" she demanded, panic creeping into her voice. People nearby stared, unsure whether to intervene. Some whispered to each other, while others quickly looked away, pretending not to notice. Despite her resistance, the men were stronger. They dragged her toward the exit, ignoring her protests. As they passed through the crowded dining area, Laura caught glimpses of shocked faces. A young couple at a nearby table exchanged worried glances. An older man in a suit frowned disapprovingly, but didn't say anything. Even the staff seemed hesitant to act, watching silently as the scene unfolded. Outside, the cool night air hit Laura like a slap. The streetlights cast a pale glow over the sidewalk, illuminating the chaos. The men pushed her forward, forcing her to stumble onto the pavement. Her knees scraped against the rough surface, and she winced in pain. "You can't do this," she shouted, struggling to stand. "This is illegal." One of the men leaned down, his face inches from hers. His expression was cold, devoid of emotion. "You don't belong here," he said quietly, his words dripping with menace. Then, without another word, He straightened up and signaled to his partner. The two men turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd as if nothing had happened. Laura stayed on the ground for a moment, breathing heavily. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of what had just occurred. Why had those men targeted her? What did they mean by saying she didn't belong? None of it made any sense. Slowly she got to her feet, brushing dirt off her jeans. Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone in her pocket. She needed answers, and she wasn't going to stop until she found them. Back inside the restaurant, whispers filled the air. Servers resumed their duties, though their movements were slower now, weighed down by unease. Customers returned to their meals, but the mood had shifted. The warmth and charm of Bella Vita had been replaced by an underlying tension, a reminder that even the most ordinary evenings could take unexpected turns. For Laura, the incident marked the beginning of something far bigger than she could have imagined. Little did she know, her life was about to change in ways she couldn't predict. All because of one strange encounter in a restaurant on a seemingly ordinary night. The next morning, Laura woke up feeling groggy and disoriented. Her head throbbed with a dull ache, and her body still carried the soreness from being dragged out of the restaurant the night before. She lay in bed for a few minutes, staring at the ceiling, trying to piece together what had happened. The memory of those two men in dark suits loomed large in her mind, how they had grabbed her, ignored her protests, and left her on the cold sidewalk like she was nothing. She clenched her fists tightly, frustration bubbling inside her. Finally, she forced herself to get up. Padding barefoot into the kitchen, she poured herself a cup of coffee and carried it to the living room. Outside her window, the sun was just beginning to rise, casting a pale glow over the city skyline. It was quiet now, but soon the streets would fill with the sounds of honking cars and rushing pedestrians. Laura took a sip of her coffee, letting the warmth spread through her chest, and stared blankly at the TV, which hummed softly in the background, with the morning news. That's when she noticed something strange outside her window. At first, she thought her eyes were playing tricks on her, but no, it was real. Parked along the curb directly below her apartment was a fleet of luxury cars. There were shiny black Mercedes-Benzes lined up next to sleek silver BMWs, and even a gleaming white Rolls-Royce stood out among them. Their polished exteriors caught the sunlight, making them look almost otherworldly against the gray backdrop of the city street. Laura set her coffee mug down and walked closer to the window. She leaned forward slightly, squinting to get a better look. People walking by stopped to glance at the cars, some pointing or pulling out their phones to take pictures. It wasn't every day you saw such an extravagant display of wealth in this part of town. What struck Laura as odd, though, was that none of the cars seemed to have drivers. They sat there silently, empty, as if waiting for something or someone. Her heart began to race again. Was this connected to what had happened last night? Had those men come back for her? Or worse, had they sent someone else? She backed away from the window, suddenly feeling exposed. Just then, there was a knock at her door. Startled, she froze in place, her pulse pounding in her ears. After a moment, she hesitantly made her way to the door and peeked through the peephole. Standing outside was a man dressed in a perfectly tailored suit. He looked professional, his posture straight and confident, but there was something about him that made Laura uneasy. His face was calm, almost too calm, and his eyes scanned the hallway as if he were expecting trouble. Taking a deep breath, she unlocked the door and cracked it open just enough to see him clearly. "Can I help you?" she asked cautiously, keeping the chain lock securely in place. The man gave her a polite smile. "Good morning, Miss Bennett," he said smoothly. "My name is Richard Carter. May I come in?" Laura frowned. "How do you know my name?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card, holding it up so she could read it. The card was plain, with only a phone number printed on it and no company, logo, or title. "I'd prefer to explain everything inside," he said, his tone calm but firm. Laura hesitated. Something about this man and the mysterious cars outside didn't sit right with her, but curiosity got the better of her. Slowly, she closed the door, removed the chain, and opened it again. "Okay," she said, stepping aside to let him in. But I want answers. Richard stepped into the apartment, glancing around briefly before turning his attention back to her. He gestured toward the couch. "May we sit?" he asked politely. Laura nodded and led him to the living room. She sat down on one end of the couch while he took the other, maintaining a respectful distance. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Richard crossed his legs and adjusted his tie, looking completely at ease. Laura, on the other hand, felt anything but relaxed. She crossed her arms over her chest and fixed him with a hard stare. "So," she said finally, breaking the silence, "what do you want?" Richard cleared his throat. "First, let me apologize for the events of last night," he began. "It must have been unsettling for you." "Unsettling?" Laura repeated, her voice rising slightly. "You think being forcibly removed from a restaurant by two strangers is just unsettling. I understand your frustration," Richard said quickly, raising a hand to placate her. "But please believe me when I say that it was never our intention to harm you. The situation was complicated." "Complicated how?" Laura demanded. "Who are you people? Why did those men grab me?" Richard paused, choosing his words carefully. "Miss Bennett, the restaurant you visited last night was hosting a private event, a gathering of individuals involved in matters of significant importance. Your presence there triggered certain security protocols." "Security? Protocols?" Laura echoed, shaking her head in disbelief. "I didn't even know the place was hosting an event. I just went there to eat dinner." "We're aware of that," Richard said. "Unfortunately, due to the nature of the meeting, any unexpected guests were flagged immediately. When facial recognition software identified you as a potential risk, action was taken." "A potential risk?" Laura exclaimed, throwing her hands up in exasperation. "I'm not a risk, I'm just a regular person trying to live my life." "I assure you this has nothing to do with who you are personally," Richard replied. "It's simply a matter of protocol. We can't take chances when it comes to these kinds of situations." Laura narrowed her eyes. "What kind of situations? What exactly were those people discussing in that restaurant?" Richard hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "I'm afraid I can't disclose that information," he admitted. "All I can tell you is that it involves international diplomacy and sensitive negotiations." Laura snorted. "International diplomacy? Seriously? You expect me to believe that?" "It's the truth," Richard insisted. "And I realize this all sounds absurd. But trust me, the less you know, the safer you'll be." "That's not good enough," Laura shot back. "You can't just barge into my life, drag me out of a restaurant, park a bunch of fancy cars outside my apartment, and then refuse to give me answers." Richard sighed, rubbing his temples. "I understand why you're upset, and I promise you we're working to resolve this misunderstanding. But for now, I need you to trust me." Laura leaned back against the couch, crossing her arms again. She studied him carefully, searching for any sign of deception. He seemed sincere enough, but there was something about his vague explanations that left her feeling unsettled. Still, she didn't have much choice but to play along for now. "Fine," she said reluctantly. "But if you're lying to me, I swear I'll find out." Richard nodded, standing up. "Thank you for your cooperation, Miss Bennett. If you have any questions or if anything unusual happens, you can reach me at this number." He handed her the business card, which she accepted reluctantly. As he turned to leave, Laura called after him. "Wait, one more thing. Those cars outside, are they yours?" Richard glanced toward the window without answering. "Goodbye, Miss Bennett," he said simply, and then he was gone. Laura watched him go, her mind racing. Whatever was happening, it was far bigger than she had imagined. And despite Richard's assurances, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was only scratching the surface of a much deeper mystery. After Richard left, Laura couldn't sit still. Her mind buzzed with questions, and the vague answers he had given her weren't enough to satisfy her curiosity or calm her growing unease. She paced back and forth in her apartment, replaying the events of the past 24 hours over and over again in her head. From being dragged out of the restaurant to waking up to a fleet of luxury cars parked outside her building, nothing about this situation made sense. And now, some stranger claiming to represent an unnamed organization expected her to just trust him? Not a chance. Laura decided she wasn't going to wait around for someone else to tell her what was happening. If they wouldn't give her answers, she'd find them herself. She grabbed her laptop and sat down at her kitchen table, opening files and programs she hadn't touched in months. As a graphic designer, she wasn't exactly a detective, but she did have one skill that might come in handy: analyzing images. With a little help from technology, and maybe a friend or two, she could dig deeper into what had really happened at Bella Vita. Her first step was to look for surveillance footage. Restaurants like Bella Vita almost always had cameras installed, both inside and outside the building. If she could get access to those recordings, she might be able to spot something useful, like who those men were, where they came from, or why they targeted her specifically. But getting hold of private security footage wasn't easy. For that, she needed help. She picked up her phone and dialed Alex Moore, an old college friend who worked as a tech consultant. Alex had always been the go-to guy when anyone needed advice on computers, software, or hacking, not that he ever admitted to doing anything illegal. Still, Laura knew he wouldn't turn her away if she asked for assistance. "Hey, Alex," she said when he answered. "I need your help with something." Alex chuckled on the other end of the line. "You're calling me for tech support again? What is it this time? Did you spill coffee on your keyboard?" "No, it's not my keyboard," Laura replied, her voice serious. "It's complicated. Can we meet up? I'll explain everything." There was a pause. "You sound stressed. Is everything okay?" "Not really," Laura admitted. "But I'll tell you more when I see you. Are you free tonight?" "Can make time," Alex said. "Where should we meet?" They agreed to meet at a small cafe near Laura's apartment later that evening. By the time she arrived, Alex was already there, sipping a latte and scrolling through his phone. He looked up as she approached, raising an eyebrow at her disheveled appearance. "You look like you haven't slept in days," he remarked. "I feel like I haven't," Laura muttered, sliding into the seat across from him. She ordered a coffee and then launched into her story, starting with the bizarre incident at the restaurant and ending with Richard's cryptic visit that morning. Alex listened intently, occasionally nodding or asking clarifying questions. When she finished, Alex leaned back in his chair, whistling softly. "Wow, that's wild. So let me get this straight. You think you were mistakenly flagged as a threat because of some high-stakes meeting at a restaurant?" "It's the only thing that makes sense," Laura said. "But I need proof. That's where you come in." Alex grinned. "All right, I'm intrigued. What do you need me to do?" "I need access to surveillance footage from around the restaurant," Laura explained. "If we can piece together what happened before, during, and after I was removed, maybe we can figure out who those men were and why they thought I was a risk." Alex nodded thoughtfully. "It won't be easy, but it's doable. Most places use cloud-based storage for their cameras, so if we can hack into their system, or at least find a way to request the footage, we might get lucky. Let's start by mapping out all the cameras in the area." Over the next few hours, Alex guided Laura through the process of identifying nearby businesses and public spaces that likely had security cameras. They compiled a list of potential sources, including the restaurant itself, a bank across the street, and even a bus stop half a block away. Using his connections and technical expertise, Alex managed to retrieve fragments of video from several of these locations. Back at Laura's apartment, they set up shop at her kitchen table, surrounded by laptops, cables, and empty coffee mugs. Together, they pored over the footage frame by frame, searching for clues. At first, it seemed like a dead end. The quality of some videos was poor, and others didn't capture the right angles. But then, they struck gold. On a grainy clip from the bank's outdoor camera, they spotted the two men in dark suits walking briskly toward the restaurant. Behind them, partially obscured by shadows, was a black van parked along the curb. Its license plate was barely visible, but Alex zoomed in and enhanced the image until they could read the numbers. "This is it," Alex said triumphantly. "We've got something to work with." Using the license plate, Laura and Alex traced the van back to a shell company registered under multiple aliases. It was a dead end, at least officially, but it gave them a lead. Whoever owned the van clearly didn't want to be found, which only deepened the mystery. As the night wore on, Laura began noticing strange things happening around her. When she went to her favorite coffee shop the next morning, she saw unfamiliar faces lingering nearby. A man in a hoodie sat at a table outside, pretending to read a newspaper, but glancing up every time she moved. Another day, she caught sight of a woman standing too close to her neighbor Emily Dawson, asking casual questions about Laura's habits. Even her phone started acting strangely. Calls from unknown numbers would ring once and then disconnect. Notifications popped up randomly, even when she wasn't using any apps. It was subtle but undeniable. Someone was watching her. Laura confided in Emily, hoping for some reassurance. "Do you think I'm imagining things?" she asked one evening as they chatted on the balcony. Emily frowned. "No, I don't think you're imagining it. I've noticed those same people hanging around lately. Honestly, it's kind of creepy." That conversation sent a chill down Laura's spine. She realized she couldn't keep ignoring the signs. Whoever was behind this was persistent and possibly dangerous. One evening, while scrolling through social media, Laura stumbled upon a post from Daniel Hayes, a former colleague she hadn't spoken to in years. In the photo, Daniel stood with a group of people at a networking event. What caught Laura's eye, though, was a familiar face in the background. One of the men who had removed her from the restaurant was standing casually among the crowd, holding a drink and smiling as if nothing was wrong. Laura's heart skipped a beat. She immediately sent Daniel a message, asking about the event and whether he recognized the man in the picture. To her surprise, Daniel responded quickly. "That's Marcus Lane," he wrote. "He works for a firm that handles international negotiations. They're pretty secretive, but I heard they're involved in some big projects overseas." The name meant nothing to Laura, but it was another piece of the puzzle. She thanked Daniel and saved the information, determined to learn more. With each new clue, the picture became clearer, but also more complicated. Whatever was happening, it went far beyond a simple misunderstanding at a restaurant, and Laura couldn't shake the feeling that she was running out of time to uncover the truth. Laura stared at the phone number Richard had given her, turning it over in her mind like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. She had spent days piecing together fragments of information, surveillance footage, license plates, cryptic conversations, but none of it added up to anything concrete. Every lead seemed to end in more questions, and every answer felt just out of reach. It was frustrating, exhausting, and terrifying all at once. But one thing was clear. If she wanted real answers, she needed to take control of the situation herself. She picked up her phone and dialed the number. After 3 rings, a calm voice answered. "Richard Carter speaking." "It's Laura Bennett," she said, trying to sound confident despite the nerves bubbling inside her. "I want to meet you again, face to face." There was a brief pause on the other end. "Of course," Richard replied smoothly. "Where would you like to meet?" "Not in my apartment," Laura said quickly. "Somewhere neutral, somewhere public." "Understood," Richard said. "How about Lincoln Park? There's a secluded area near the pond where we can talk privately." Laura hesitated. Meeting in a park sounded risky. What if this was a trap? But staying cooped up in her apartment wasn't helping either. She needed to confront whoever was behind all this head-on. "Fine," she said finally. "When?" "Tonight at sunset," Richard suggested. "Will that work for you?" "Yes," Laura replied, "but I'm bringing someone with me, a friend." "Very well," Richard said. "We'll see you then." As soon as the call ended, Laura called Alex. He agreed to come along, though he warned her not to do anything reckless. "If things go south, we need a backup plan," he said. "Promise me you won't walk into danger without thinking." "Promise," Laura said, though she wasn't entirely sure she meant it. Her determination outweighed her fear, at least for now. That evening, Laura and Alex arrived at Lincoln Park just as the sun began to dip below the horizon. The air was cool and the sky glowed orange and pink, casting long shadows across the grass. They found the pond easily enough. It was surrounded by tall trees, creating a natural barrier between them and the rest of the park. Sure enough, a Audi's sleek black car was parked nearby, its engine silent. Sitting on a wooden bench beside the pond was a woman Laura didn't recognize. She looked to be in her 50s with sharp features, short gray hair, and an air of authority. She wore a tailored navy blue suit and held a leather folder in her lap. Beside her stood Richard, who nodded politely when he saw Laura approach. "This is Margaret Ellis," Richard said, gesturing toward the woman. "She'll be handling your case moving forward." Margaret rose from the bench and extended a hand. "Miss Bennett," she said, her tone crisp but polite. "Thank you for agreeing to meet us." Laura shook her hand cautiously. "You have some explaining to do," she said bluntly. "And I'm not leaving until I get answers." Margaret gave her a thin smile. "Fair enough. Please have a seat." Laura glanced at Alex, who shrugged and motioned for her to sit down. Reluctantly, she took a spot on the bench while Alex lingered a few feet away, keeping watch. Margaret sat back down, placing the folder on her lap. "For starters," Margaret began, "let me apologize for the events of the past few days. You've been caught up in something far bigger than you deserve." "That much I figured out, myself," Laura said dryly. "What I don't understand is why. Why were those men sent after me? What did they think I was doing?" Margaret sighed, opening the folder. The meeting at Bella Vita wasn't just any gathering. It involved high-level diplomats and representatives from several countries. Their discussions were sensitive, matters of global importance that required absolute secrecy. Laura frowned. "So what does that have to do with me? I wasn't even invited." "You're right, you weren't," Margaret admitted. "But facial recognition software flagged you as a potential threat. Specifically, you resemble someone else, a person of interest connected to rival factions." "A person of interest?" Laura echoed, her voice rising slightly. "Who am I supposed to look like?" Margaret hesitated before answering. "Her name is Rachel Morgan. She's a whistleblower who has exposed classified information related to international affairs. Certain groups are very interested in finding her." Laura stared at her, stunned. "Are you saying I got dragged out of a restaurant because I look like someone else?" "In essence, yes," Margaret said. "It was a mistake, one we're working to correct. But unfortunately, being mistaken for Rachel Morgan could still put you in danger." Laura clenched her fists, anger bubbling inside her. "This is insane. You can't just ruin someone's life because of a mix-up." "We're aware of how serious this is," Margaret said calmly, "which is why we're offering you a choice. You can walk away now, pretend none of this ever happened, and we'll ensure your safety. Or," she paused, looking directly at Laura, "you can help us resolve the confusion once and for all." "Help you how?" Laura asked warily. "By assisting us in identifying Rachel Morgan," Margaret explained. "Your resemblance to her gives us an opportunity to draw her out safely. If we can prove to everyone involved that you're not her, we can protect both of you and prevent further misunderstandings." Laura exchanged a glance with Alex, who looked skeptical. "And if I refuse?" she asked. "Then we leave you alone," Margaret said simply. "But I must warn you, the people hunting Rachel Morgan aren't known for their patience or restraint. If they find you first, they may not care whether you're actually her." The weight of Margaret's words settled heavily on Laura. For a moment, she considered walking away, letting someone else deal with the mess she'd been unwillingly dragged into. But deep down, she knew she couldn't. Not only did she want answers, but she also felt a strange sense of responsibility. If Rachel Morgan was truly in danger, Laura couldn't turn her back on her, not when she might be able to help. "All right," she said finally, her voice steady. "I'll do it, but I have conditions." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "Such as?" "I want full transparency," Laura said firmly. "No more secrets, no more half-truths. And Alex stays with me every step of the way." Margaret studied her for a moment before nodding. "Agreed. We'll keep you informed throughout the process." As the conversation continued, Laura realized she was stepping into uncharted territory. Whatever lay ahead, it would be dangerous, unpredictable, and far beyond anything she'd ever imagined. But for the first time since the incident at the Wow restaurant, she felt like she had a purpose. And maybe, just maybe, she could use this chaos to make a difference, even if it meant risking everything. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Margaret and Richard worked closely with Laura and Alex, guiding them through the intricate web of international diplomacy and espionage they had stumbled into. They explained that Rachel Morgan, the whistleblower Laura resembled, was hiding from powerful adversaries who wanted her silenced or worse. These adversaries included not only rival factions within the global political landscape, but also rogue elements operating outside the law. Margaret emphasized that time was critical. If Rachel didn't surface soon, the confusion surrounding Laura's identity would only escalate, putting both women in greater danger. To resolve the situation, they devised a plan. Laura would act as bait, using her resemblance to Rachel to draw out key players on both sides. It was a risky move, but it offered the best chance of clearing Laura's name while ensuring Rachel's safety. Laura agreed reluctantly, though her stomach churned with nerves. "What exactly am I supposed to do?" she asked during one of their strategy sessions. "You'll attend a controlled meeting," Margaret explained. "We've arranged for representatives from both sides, the diplomats seeking peace and the operatives hunting Rachel, to gather in a neutral location. You'll present yourself as Rachel under heavy protection to gauge their reactions." "And then what?" Laura pressed. "What happens when they realize I'm not her?" "That's where we step in," Margaret said. "Once we confirm your identity and prove you're not Rachel, we can negotiate a temporary truce. This will give us time to locate Rachel and ensure her safety." Laura glanced at Alex, who gave her an encouraging nod. Despite his earlier reservations, he had become her steadfast ally, vowing to stay by her side no matter what. "All right," she said finally. "Let's do this." The meeting took place in a high-rise office building overlooking the city. The room was modern and minimalist, with large floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of the skyline at night. A long wooden table dominated the space, surrounded by chairs occupied by representatives from both sides. On one side sat the diplomats, men and women in tailored suits, their expressions calm but calculating. On the other side were the operatives, clad in tactical gear, exuding an air of menace. Laura entered the room flanked by Margaret and Alex. She wore simple clothing, a plain blouse and jeans, but carried herself with quiet confidence. Her heart pounded as all eyes turned to her, studying her face intently. For a moment she felt exposed, vulnerable, like a deer caught in headlights. But she reminded herself why she was here, to set things right, not just for herself, but for Rachel Morgan too. Margaret stepped forward, addressing the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. As you know, recent events have caused significant confusion. Tonight we aim to clarify matters once and for all." She gestured toward Laura. "This is Laura Bennett. She has been mistakenly identified as Rachel Morgan due to their striking resemblance. We've brought her here to demonstrate conclusively that she is not the individual you seek." Murmurs rippled through the room as people exchanged glances. One of the diplomats, a middle-aged man with graying hair, leaned forward skeptically. "And how do we know this isn't a trick? How do we know she's telling the truth?" Margaret opened a laptop on the table and displayed several documents and photos. "These records confirm Laura's identity," she said. "Furthermore, we've conducted facial recognition analysis comparing her to Rachel Morgan. While there are similarities, they are distinct individuals." The operatives seemed less convinced. Their leader, a tall woman with sharp features and cold eyes, stood abruptly. "This proves nothing," she snapped. "We need concrete evidence, not theories or excuses." Laura swallowed hard, stepping forward before Margaret could respond. "I understand your skepticism," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "But I'm not here to deceive anyone. I just want to live my life without being dragged into something I don't belong in. And if helping you find Rachel Morgan means I can go back to normal, then that's what I'm willing to do." Her words hung in the air, breaking through the tension. The woman narrowed her eyes, studying Laura closely. After a long pause, she nodded curtly. "Very well. But if this turns out to be a waste of our time— It won't, Laura interrupted, firmly. I promise. Over the next hour, the discussion grew heated, with both sides arguing over next steps. The diplomats pushed for cooperation and transparency, while the operatives demanded immediate action. Laura listened intently, absorbing every detail. Though she wasn't directly involved in the negotiations, her presence served as a constant reminder of the stakes. Slowly but surely, tensions began to ease, thanks in part to Margaret's diplomatic skills and Laura's unwavering determination. By the end of the meeting, they reached a fragile agreement, a temporary truce while efforts continued to locate Rachel Morgan. In exchange for their cooperation, the operatives agreed to stand down, for now. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was progress. As the group dispersed, Laura felt a wave of relief wash over her. She turned to Margaret, who smiled faintly. You did well, she said. Better than most would have under these circumstances. Thanks, Laura replied softly. But it's not over yet, is it? No, Margaret admitted. Not completely. But you've given us a fighting chance. Back at her apartment later that night, Laura stood on her balcony, gazing out at the city lights. The fleet of luxury cars was gone, leaving behind only faint tire marks on the pavement. Life seemed almost normal again, though she knew it never truly would be. What she had experienced had changed her forever, opening her eyes to a world far more complex and dangerous than she'd ever imagined. Still, she felt a sense of accomplishment. By standing up for herself and refusing to back down, she had uncovered the truth and helped protect someone she didn't even know. Somewhere out there, Rachel Morgan was safe. For now. And maybe, just maybe, Laura's actions had made the world a little brighter, even if only in a small way. As she sipped her coffee and watched the sunrise, Laura allowed herself a small smile. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she was ready to face them, one step at a time.